today's episode, we're going to be talking about promises. So we've used promises in previous episodes. Most recently, we've created the login method, which was a promise, and then we used the then and catch methods in order to work with the promise. We're going to find out more about what those are this week. Promises are a way of doing asynchronous communication. If you want to talk to a server, local storage, something that might take a little while to get back to you, then promises are a much better option than just callbacks, which is what we were doing before promises. In addition to being included by default within Ember, they're also worked pretty deeply into the Ember ecosystem. For example, Ember Data returns a promise when you do a find or a fetch, and the model hook in a route is set up so it'll take a promise and then work with it so you don't have to know that a promise ever happened. It looks like it's all synchronous, and that's part of the magic of promises. So when you're using a promise, there are three methods that you need to know about. They are then, catch, and finally. So then is what you call when something goes right. Catch is what you call when something goes wrong. And finally is what you call no matter what at the end. So let's see how that applies to our login method. So our login method, we created it as a promise, and we'll go more into that, how that happens in this week's Pro episode. But we created a promise, and it can either resolve or reject. So if it resolves, if things went correctly, then we do whatever is in the then block. So we do promise.then, and we put in this case, an anonymous function here, and we do whatever is in there. And then, if something goes poorly, then we call .catch. And you can return a reason. It's usually a good idea. You can also return something from the then. So you could perhaps do like the user. We just didn't in this case. And then you can call finally. Let's go ahead and create a finally block here. So we put it after all this, and notice we're chaining them. And then with the finally, we'll just put in a console.log. Then we'll go ahead and first we'll trigger the catch block by putting in an incorrect username and password. And it does the stuff in the catch block, and it also logs we are done with the promises. And then we'll go ahead and fill out the correct information. And we'll log in, and notice it does the stuff in success block, and then it still does the finally. And it does this even though we're transitioning, we're redirecting during the then block. But it still does the finally, even though we're going to a different route. We can have our then blocks and our catch blocks and our finally blocks. We can also stack then blocks, so we can do a series of steps. Let me show you a simple example. So we're going to add a then block before what we have currently as our first then block. Now in this then block, we're going to log out the user ID, what we have as the user, and then we'll just return it. And then we'll go ahead and put a console.log in the next then block to make sure it's been passed on. And as you can see, we've added a little bit of extra text here so that we can tell that it's being passed on from this return block and not directly from the original one. So let's access this again. Here we go. We've got our first console log, our second log that's taking in the return value from the first then, and then of course our finally. So to go over this order, it does the first then, and then whenever this has been returned, it does the second then. And then there have been no thrown errors, so it skips the catch block, then it goes to the finally block. If at any point there's an error, or the promise is rejected instead of resolved, it'll go to the catch block. So far, we've only been using anonymous functions that we define for the express purpose of this promise. But we can also have named functions. So we'll go ahead and take all this and we'll rename it to log ID. And so with just a couple quick changes, we can have it as a named function and call it like this. And then in our app, we'll see that it works the same way. We could actually do all of these as named methods. So I'm going to do that with the snap of my fingers. So look how cool this is. We can tell what's happening. So first we log in, and then we log the ID, and then we do a successful login transition. If there's any errors, we catch and display errors. And then finally, we do a silly log. So this is a beautiful way to structure your code that makes it extremely easy to read. And we can do this thanks to promises. Hey, one correction from future Jeffrey. So in these two, we're calling this, but we're not specifying which this it is here. So we're going to have to call .bind this, so we get the context right. Previously, that was fine because we were using the fat arrows, but now we aren't, and so we have to do this. In the rest of the video, this will not be done like this because I'm making this correction from the future. All right, now back to the regular show. In addition to promises role in Ember Data and the router, they're also used in the test helpers, specifically the asynchronous test helpers. So all of these are promises where they return a promise, and so you can visit something, fill in something, click something, all that, and it will automatically wait until that action is complete. That's really powerful, and if you've ever tried to test Ember in something like Capybara or Cucumber, you know that being able to use promises to help you know when it's okay to move on, rather than just waiting and hope you've waited long enough, which is error-prone and slows down your tests. Using promises is much better. So in this episode, we learned about promises, how to chain them, how to use the then, catch, and finally blocks, and how to do named promises, how to put a named method in there. In the next episode, we'll be showing how to create a promise from scratch, how to start the promise chain, like we did in our login method. Then, next week, we'll be talking about how to handle multiple concurrent promises using the arrays and hashes. I'll see you then.